and welcome to the CNBC Africa Special, coming to you from Expo 2020 in Dubai. This is the biggest exhibition to take place in the world since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. The main themes that will be discussed here are opportunity, mobility, and sustainability. Many African countries are here to look at ways they can foster greater economic and investment ties with the United Arab Emirates, and we'll be tracking the developments in this show.
It's been very, very positive being here, seeing the engagement. It's really, really exciting to see just the extent of commitment and interest that there is from local business people to look for business opportunities and to operate on the African continent. And so what I laid out were just a number of the opportunities that exist on the African continent for us to see more digital players being around. And I spoke about the work that we are doing through NASPER's Foundry, where we are supporting tech entrepreneurs through our 1.4 billion rand fund. And I spoke about the fact that we've already invested 400 million rands worth of that in 7 founders of businesses. And these are businesses that range from agri-tech businesses to, it's a number of businesses, insure-tech businesses, there's a number of businesses that we've invested into. And it's really exciting just to see the opportunities that exist on the African continent and the extent to which they're scaling. One of the businesses that I spoke about was aerobotics, which has scaled to an extent where they now receive a significant portion of their revenues from the US. And it's brilliant to see the South African founders of businesses being able to scale up to that extent. And I also spoke about the African Free Trade agreement that is now in place, where there is so much scope. I mean, the African continent presents an opportunity of $3.4 trillion to investors to come in and develop businesses here on the African continent. And so the opportunities are significant, and we are really excited about the projects that we are involved in South Africa.
That's fantastic, Pooty. I mean, as one of the biggest tech investors in Africa, you're a big listed company. What kind of capital inflows are you seeing in the internet business in South Africa? Who are you meeting, for example? Have you closed any big deals yet?
We have. In fact, the last 2 deals that we just closed were 2 businesses in the insurtech sector. It was really, really excellent to just see the profile and the extent of these founders of businesses. One of the businesses is a business called Control, which we invested 34 million rand into. And the other business is also an insurtech business, which provides the full spectrum of insurance, and we invested 120 million into that business. And it's really, really been exciting just to see the scale of growth in all of these businesses. And so that the business that we invested 120 million is Naked. And so you see just the extent to which the opportunities are there. And I've spoken about agri-tech, I think, and that's the aerobotics investment that we made, where we invested 100 million rand into. And so there's been a number of businesses. And what really excites me is seeing how our e-commerce business, Take-A-Lot, has created such tremendous opportunities for emerging tech entrepreneurs who have been able to come on board onto the platform and be able to place their goods online. And it's been brilliant to see the support that they have provided to small and medium-sized enterprises in that manner. So it's really been an excellent environment in terms of growth in the internet space. Looking at even Mr. D. Mr. D continued to provide employment to the people that bring you the food to your home, and do so in a safe manner to ensure that they wouldn't be impacted by the scourge of COVID-19 that we have all gone through. And so, it's really been an exciting time looking at Sweep South, which has Sweep South is an online cleaning platform. And they have now scaled beyond South Africa. They're in Kenya, they're in Nigeria, So it's brilliant. It's an exciting time, and it's wonderful to be here in Dubai and seeing the extent of commitment that there is to building businesses on the African continent.
We were very happy because we reached our expectations in terms of partnerships that we were looking for. As you said, we are DFI, Development and Investment Bank of Mozambique, and as our role, we have to finance development through financing infrastructures and productive sector. But there are some projects that require huge amounts of money that we can't afford through our balance sheet. So we get mandates from our clients, which are government institutions, public and private companies, and we go abroad to raise these funds, and we are here for that. We met investors, financiers. We had very good discussions, and we had very good results, so that I can say we are very happy for that.
And what's the financing pipeline looking like for this year, for the medium term, and which sectors will you be focusing on to channel growth in your country?
Yeah, to channel growth in our country, we are looking for investments and financing for projects in different sectors, which are pillars for the current term of the government, namely infrastructures, tourism, agriculture, power and industry. So these are the sectors that we are looking for in terms of investments, in terms of availability of funds to fund or to finance all those projects that are in our pipeline. Hopefully we came well prepared with our pipeline, with all the projects well structured, with teasers that we presented to our potential investors or financiers, and they all liked it, and they all provided their availability to partner with us to finance, and mainly to create and consolidate the partnership so that we can finance, or so that they can invest and provide more financing in future projects.
You mentioned twice that you've spoken to investors and potential financiers here at the Expo. How many of them were from the United Arab Emirates, and what is the appetite from the UAE in your experience so far to do business and more business in Africa?
According to my experience during these days, I could realize that they are looking for investments in sectors like real estate, infrastructures, logistic infrastructures mainly, tourism. Some of them they are looking for agriculture projects, and we could also realize that many of them have already projects running in Mozambique. They are already investing in Mozambique, and they need to consolidate their investments there, and they received very well our projects, and they demonstrated their interest to consolidate this partnership with Mozambique.
What brings the Botswana Stock Exchange to Expo, and have you met the targets that you set out to achieve?
Yeah, I think what brings the BSE to the Expo is the idea that we want to broaden our market, especially in terms of the investor base, and also because some of our services are consumed in the Expo, especially the stock market data that we produced. We have a service provider who is actually feeding the Middle East, and we have got a significant number of investors from the Middle East who are investing in our market, and we also want to attract more investors into our market from this region.
What we've seen throughout the pandemic is a number of companies that are listed on the stock exchange actually bid their listing goodbye as a result of a whole host of reasons. Maybe the economy, maybe the expense of staying on the stock exchange. So just talk to us about maybe what the listing and the delisting profile is looking like right now for the BSE.
Yeah, I think that is true to some extent. But what we realize is that actually during the pandemic, a lot of companies that are listed took advantage of the fact that they are listed entities, and they were able to raise capital from the public by issuing more shares so that they can increase their cash flow, and they can also protect themselves against the pandemic. And it was much more easier for listed entities to raise funds than companies that are not listed, because when a company is not listed, the only capital that you can get is to go to a bank. And then in terms of pandemic, banks don't lend out a lot of money because it's a risky atmosphere. But you can get money from additional investors because already they own your shares, for example. So what we have seen is that we have seen some level of increase in terms of the interest in the market for companies that are not listed. So we are following up on a number of companies that have potentially list in the coming few months or in the coming few years.
Have you received any such expressions of interest from companies here, companies in the UAE in your time here?
Not really. We haven't received a lot of companies here expressing to list in our market. But I think what we have received is some investors who will possibly consider our market, because I mean, if you look at the returns on comparative terms, the returns offered in most of Botswana market or other African markets are comparatively much more competitive than what is offered elsewhere.
The continent is looking to fuel innovation and drive it at a bigger scale. And at this conference, one of the ideas that were put forward to do it was strengthening capital markets.
Yes.
For you, how would that journey of making the capital markets in the continent a lot stronger, how would that go?
Yeah, I think it will go well, but there are certain aspects that we need to get well. Number one, we need to get our regulatory framework or the ecosystem of the market to world standard. We need to upscale it so that we run markets based on international practices. And also we need to broaden our issuer base and our investor base. You have markets in Africa, but you realize that markets in Africa, a lot of the basic domestic economy participants are not included in the market. And I think that is where actually the most strength can get from. There's a lot of potential to get, especially the medium-sized companies, who are the real players in the economy in Africa, into the capital markets. There's a lot of potential also in terms of investor base, broaden the inclusivity of investors, especially the local participants in the market. We don't necessarily always have to target people from outside Africa.
You've been talking about innovation, you've been talking about opportunities for young people, and also the collaboration potentially between Africa and the UAE. But let's start there. What can African firms, in your view, offer the UAE?
Sure. Well, so I think the most important currency in the UAE is that you've got to be a credible, trusted partner. So your track record, actually, it's a soft asset, but it's a critical asset in these parts. The second is beyond the mineral industrial complex, beyond the agriculture industrial complex. The UAE is finally looking to Africa for skill, for knowledge workers, and for services-based industries. So if you're in the skill economy, the knowledge economy, to really start thinking about how can you access this market and become a portal of labor that is affordable for the rest of the world. The world is globalized, right? And that's what COVID has enabled us to do, which means you have people in Africa who speak fairly good English, if not the best English in the world, with capital markets that work, environments that understand exactly what the world needs. So I think it's important for us to think beyond the traditional industries that we've always offered to the rest of the world.
And in the same breath, what can the UAE offer African firms who are looking to scale up further up the continent?
Yeah, so that's a critical question. And my answer to that would be, it's not just capital. Everybody talks about capital, and I'm not saying money is not important. Money lubricates the engine, it gets the machine going, right? But beyond the capital, it's also about providing the best skill and labor. It's about providing expertise. It's about providing training and education in the markets that you're operating in. It's also about thinking outside of the narrow investment opportunity. You're looking at to the wider ecosystem, the value chain, the full economy, right? And so my plea to investors coming from other parts of the world, even here in the UAE, is look beyond the narrow sector that you're focused on. Look outside of it, look at the margins of it, and look at the value chain effect of what you can do, and also look beyond the money.
You deal with a lot of small to medium-sized enterprises that are looking to scale up and grow. And to what degree would you say that the regulatory and the policy framework between the two nations is enabling to facilitate that growth at a faster pace?
So the great thing is that Africa is now finally getting its act together on this SME space. We've been talking about it for a long, long time. But you know, finally, I'm part of the cohort, for instance, in the committee that's working to bring a Startup Act to South Africa. We've had a Startup Act in Tunisia. There's a Startup Act in many parts of the continent. These acts are important because they form the legislative bedrock that creates investor certainty. So if I'm going to get in and I'm going to put my money down, what does the environment look like? How do you guys treat knowledge? How do you treat IP? How do you treat capital? How do you treat capital gains? What are the rules that I need to understand as an external investor? And so the reason, for instance, we're here is because we're doing a lot of that education to go, this is what's happening in the ecosystem. So Africa is getting its act together, finally. And that's important because it means we can now talk to the global investor community with the same voice, and we can talk to the global investor community with the same value proposition.
Do you think that the value proposition or the premium perhaps of doing more business on the continent has been enhanced by the free trade area deal that came into effect in January? Has it moved the needle in your view?
It hasn't yet, and that's for me the exciting part, right? So you know, there is always a lag between any legislative environment you put in place and the implementation of that legislative environment and then its effect in the economy. And that's in a narrow confines of a sovereign country dealing with its own legislation. So picture the scene then when you've got multiple countries who've first got to bring that legislative environment in tandem with its own rules and then create key performance areas and then go, this is how we're going to deliver it. So the point is, it hasn't yet. For me, that's the exciting part. It means if you get in now, then all else equal, the upswing of this is going to be really, really exciting. You know, in our education business, we used to have this interesting challenge where we would get entrepreneurs in East Africa that want to buy an educational product. But how do you do that when the entrepreneur is using mobile money? How do you go from mobile money to the Kenyan shilling, then to the South African rand, right? Or whatever the case might be. And then you look at a platform like Flutterwave, which is exactly, and we've partnered with them. So what they've enabled us to do is to go, we build a single portal in Tray, and anywhere in the continent where people want to transact with you, they can, because we're multi-currency and we're multi-types of currencies. This is, for me, a small indication of what we can do with this free trade agreement. So you can break down the borders of currency, break down the borders of legislation, and break down the borders of movement of goods as well as the premium you would pay for those movement of goods. We're at the beginning, Fifi, I can't stress this enough, of something very, very exciting.
Eleni, thanks once again for your time. You're looking to solve a gap in Africa's innovation ecosystem. How do you plan on doing that?
Well, I've just recently joined UNDP Africa, Regional Bureau for Africa in New York. And what we're trying to do is launch a pretty bold and new initiative, very much private sector driven, but also public-private funding in nature, and it's called Timbuktu. And what we're trying to do is basically say, okay, so we've got some success stories. Africa has 7 unicorns that have emerged in the last 4 years, which is a spectacular success. So let's leverage that. And also when you scratch beneath the surface of that, a lot of the funding that has come into those unicorns is almost entirely foreign capital. Secondly, a lot of the knowledge and talent base of these companies is also foreign to the continent, and the founders themselves are largely coming from outside. Even if they are African, they are coming from Silicon Valley or MIT or Harvard or wherever. That's all fine, but how do you then really say we have an indigenous African innovation ecosystem where we can really see some scale and depth to the startups that are going to come out and transform lives on the continent. So we can't just leave it to foreign capital and foreign-based founders. So to do that, some of the gaps that we're seeing on the continent, one is the knowledge base, the academic R&D and linked to industry, corporate R&D. So that's a big link. I mean, there would be no Silicon Valley had there been no Stanford University. And the fact that there was a symbiotic relationship between the knowledge centers and the commercialization downstream into those startups that really have obviously changed the world. So that's one of the things that we're not seeing. African universities, African R&D sort of coming into this innovation ecosystem. The other is pools of talent. Again, universities are one, but there's also other places, including the actual local ecosystem builders, the incubators, the hubs, the accelerators. For the most part, while we see this rising trend of hubs, I think now a recent study showed about 650 hubs that have been built up on the continent. Are there any successes coming out of them? Very little. And the reason is because they're not actually aligned into the innovation ecosystem that we need to build. A lot of them are chasing donor money, and there's sort of grant money out there, and they're sort of on this cycle of launching a challenge program for this and a pitch competition on that and a hackathon for this. But how does that add up? And then the startups themselves, because we really don't have a lot of early stage risk capital, they're chasing grants, $5,000, $10,000. You can't build a business that way. You can't grow and scale that way. So in fact, in Kenya, they've even sort of coined it as pitchpreneurs. People that go from pitch to pitch, and I've seen this myself when I was running an incubator in Ethiopia, that because there's really not a lot of local VCs, local angel investors, as there are in other ecosystems, we're seeing that donors are sort of coming in to say, okay, let's do a hackathon here and a pitch competition there. That can't be how we grow our innovation ecosystem. So what we're trying to do with Timbuktu is to bring all the pieces together, and where ecosystems have evolved, there's been an intentionality by government and by public sector to make it happen. Dubai is a very good example of that, and how strong the government has been to put in IP regimes, data protection laws, open visas, enabling people to come in. So there's some of that we're going to need to really enhance and enable on the continent, but as well how to incentivize local angel investors. There's a lot of capital within Africa, a lot of high net worth individuals, but they're not coming into this because they see it as too risky, and so we need to de-risk and incentivize local capital, because wherever you see local capital coming in, foreign capital follows at much greater scale. That's something we need to see.
Is it incentives, and what kind of incentives would you be looking at, particularly when it comes to the local capital, the institutional investors, the angel investors, even the private equity players that locally that are quite averse to putting their money in startups or young companies on the continent, as opposed to what we are seeing from foreign players? How do you incentivize that mindset change or de-risk that profile?
Very good question, Ififi, and that's exactly the point. So when we look, for example, at Israel, which, as you know, is the startup nation of the world, highest number of startups per capita than anywhere on the planet, how do they do it? In the early 1990s, having sort of developed, the R&D, the strong technical universities, corporate R&D centers, etc., they were starting to develop pipeline, much in the way that now in Africa, we've got this very young, vibrant, entrepreneurial, well-educated, increasingly tech-savvy young population coming up with ideas. So we're sort of where Israel was in the early 90s. But what they didn't have is a domestic VC industry, and they said we've got to bring in domestic VC, and we're going to create it with a catalytic approach. So they put 100 million public funds into 10 sub-funds, okay? And in each of those 10 sub-funds, they said we will put in 10 funds on a sort of incentivizing or catalytic basis, and we'll have private co-investors bringing in 1.5 times 15 million into each of these 10 funds. So that was a total of $250 million that went into this program called Yozma. And in 5 years, the government exited, taking out its money, the 100 million that it had originally put in, took it out at cost, leaving all the upside to the private co-investors who leveraged that 250 into $3.2 billion within 10 years. Now, the fund by itself wouldn't have done it without the pipeline that was already emerging. But at the same time, the fund wouldn't have happened had the government not said, we will kickstart it and basically come in as a first loss investor. We'll guarantee the losses and we'll exit when the private capital is ready to take off. And that's exactly what they did. We're not seeing this happen in Africa. We're seeing only foreign investors coming into this, into the tech startups that we're seeing the successes.
So this conference is about strengthening the collaboration between Africa and the UAE. Just talk to us about the opportunities that you see for that collaboration to be strengthened within hospitality that you play in.
Exactly. I mean, for us, it's really an honor to be here at the Expo, which is the biggest stage in the world at the moment, and to be able to showcase what Africa can give in the hospitality field, yes.
And just in terms of the opportunities for many African restaurants, as you see it, to rise in the hospitality field in the UAE. It has been a very hard hit sector because of the pandemic and the lockdowns that have limited us from enjoying your food. Yes. But what kind of opportunities are you eyeing in the Middle East?
So for me, as I say, I see this as the biggest stage in the world. I want to bring Africa to this stage. I want to showcase how beautiful African food is and how we can find a place here in a market which is so competitive, but yet is a market that needs something new like African gastronomy.
And are you looking at potentially opening anything in this area?
Absolutely. I think Dubai gives you the opportunity that if you can dream it, Dubai will make it happen. So I'm here dreaming about having great African restaurant, and I'm sure I'll be looking at the market, and the market is really looking for that, because what I see at my restaurant here at the Dubai Expo, it's really people are asking for more African food. It's something new, and the market, I think, is ready for that.
But just in terms of the policy background and the regulatory background, how easy or not is it for to open up a restaurant in this market?
Well, I must say I've studied what are the regulations. It's becoming easier and easier for investor, for how can I say, overseas investor to come here and settle, because Dubai really wants to showcase the whole world. And we as African, I think there are more and more doors open for us to come and settle here in Dubai.